At 6:30 in the morning, I taped a 30-day eviction notice to my son's bedroom door. My hands weren't shaking, that surprised me. 12 hours earlier, Ryan had looked me dead in the eyes across my dinner table, in my house eating my food, and called me a leech. Not ungrateful, not difficult, a leech. I was 65 years old. I owned this house outright. I had cooked his meals, paid his truck insurance, and covered every bill for 10 months while he and his wife took weekend trips and bought designer clothes. And I was the leech. He went to bed that night convinced I would fall apart by morning. Instead, I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and started typing. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Evelyn's story travels. And if this is your first time here, subscribe. You're going to want to stay for every single part of what comes next. The fork hit the plate so hard I heard the ceramic crack underneath it. Not enough to break it, just enough to make sure I flinched. That was Ryan always knowing exactly how much force to use. Enough to shake you. Not enough to cross a line he couldn't walk back from. He'd learned that from somewhere, and God help me, I think he learned it from watching me absorb everything without breaking. You've been retired for years, Mom. His voice had that low, tight quality, the one that told me he'd been sitting on these words for a while. You barely do anything around here. You don't work. You don't contribute. You just exist, and then you want to act like a victim when you're the one living off Dad's money. Vanessa was very still across the table. The kind of still that isn't really still at all, it's performance. Her fork hovered over her plate, in the corner of her mouth I saw it. I have 65 years of reading people, and I saw it. She was enjoying this. Ryan leaned forward honestly. Mom, you're becoming a leech. The word landed the way he intended it to. I sat there for a moment, just sat there with my hands flat on the table, feeling the wood grain under my fingertips, the same table my husband Gerald and I had picked out at an estate sale 22 years ago, hauled home in a borrowed truck, and refinished ourselves over a long weekend with sandpaper and laughter and bad coffee. The same table where Ryan had done his homework every night from 5th grade through senior year, where we'd celebrated his college acceptance, where we'd held hands the night Gerald got his diagnosis. My table, my house, my life. I picked up my napkin, folded it once, and set it beside my plate. This house, I said, very quietly, was purchased with 34 years of my work. Your father's name was never on the deed, Ryan. It was always mine. He opened his mouth. You have 30 days to move out. He blinked. Then he actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound, like I'd just threatened him with something adorable. Okay, Mom, I mean it. Sure you do. He picked his fork back up. You want me to pass the salt? I stood up, carried my plate to the kitchen, washed it, dried it, put it in the cabinet, and went to my bedroom. I didn't slam the door. I closed it with a soft, deliberate click that somehow felt louder than anything I could have shouted. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time. Then I got up, turned on the lamp, opened my laptop, and searched real estate attorney, Asheville, North Carolina. That Sunday dinner wasn't the beginning. I want to be honest about that, because the beginning was so gradual, I almost didn't recognize it until I was in the middle of something I never agreed to. My husband Gerald died 2 years before Ryan and Vanessa showed up at my door with a U-Haul and a story about a failed restaurant investment. Gerald had a heart attack at 68 quick, the doctor said, like that was supposed to comfort me. One morning he was reading the paper at this same kitchen table, and by afternoon he was gone, and I spent the next 18 months learning how to be a person alone in a house that still smelled like him. When Ryan called to say he and Vanessa needed help, I said yes before he finished the sentence. Of course I did. He was my son. He was the reason I had learned to love so fiercely and so foolishly. And he was grieving too in his way, and I thought I genuinely believed that having him nearby would be good for both of us. Just 3 months, he said. We just need to get back on our feet. Take your time, I told him. That was my first mistake, not the yes, the take your time. Those 3 words communicated something I hadn't fully intended. That my time was available, that my home was available, that I, Evelyn Harper, formerly an elementary school principal for 34 years, widow, homeowner, and grown woman with her own life and her own dreams, was available without cost, without limit, without end. They moved into the main guest bedroom in April. By June, I had quietly absorbed the following: all mortgage payments, all utilities, electric, gas, internet, all grocery expenses, all household supplies. I cooked most evenings because Ryan worked long hours, or said he did, and Vanessa didn't cook. I cleaned the shared spaces because if I didn't, no one would. I accepted their friends dropping by without notice. I accepted the noise, the late nights, the living room that no longer felt like mine. By August, Ryan asked me if I could help out with his truck payment. Just for a couple months, he said, while they got stabilized. I added it to my account. I want you to understand something. I was not a passive woman. I had run a school of 400 children and 82 staff members. I had managed budgets, mediated conflicts, made hard decisions for 3 decades. I was not someone who got pushed around, but Ryan was my child. And Vanessa, I had never quite known what to make of Vanessa, But she was Ryan's wife and Ryan loved her and I was committed to making space for that. What I did not understand, not yet, was the difference between making space for love and surrendering ground to people who saw empty ground as opportunity. By October, I sat down one evening and actually wrote out the numbers. I'd been retired for 3 years, living on my pension, my Social Security, and the savings Gerald and I had built over our marriage. I was not wealthy, but I was stable, or I had been. 10 months of absorbing 2 additional adults had put a quiet, persistent pressure on finances I had managed carefully for a long time. That Sunday, I decided to bring it up. I made a nice dinner pot roast, the one Ryan had loved since childhood, set the table carefully, and waited until we were all seated. I've been thinking, I started, that it would help me if you two started contributing a little toward household expenses. I'm thinking $500 a month. Vanessa made a sound. Not words, just a sound, low and dismissive in the back of her throat. While her eyes went to her phone, Ryan set his fork down. And then he said it, and after he said it, he reached for the salt, as though calling his 65-year-old mother a leech in her own dining room was just something that happened between the pot roast and dessert. I did not sleep that night, but I also didn't cry, which surprised me. Somewhere around 2 a.m, I got up and walked through my house in the dark, through the hallway, into the living room, into the kitchen. I ran my hand along the wall beside the back door, where Gerald had penciled Ryan's height every year until he left for college. The pencil marks were still there. I had never been able to paint over them. I thought about the woman who had owned this house, the one who had bought it with her own salary, who had signed her own name on the deed, who had chosen the paint colors and planted the roses out front and paid the mortgage without missing a payment for 22 years. I thought about where that woman had gone. Then I went to my desk, opened my laptop and drafted a notice. The next morning, I printed it, put it in an envelope, and taped it to his bedroom door before the sun came up. When Ryan came downstairs that morning, I was sitting in the kitchen with my coffee, both hands wrapped around the mug, watching the light change over the backyard. He was holding the envelope. "What is this?" "A 30-day notice." He pulled out the paper, read it for a moment, and I watched his face icicle through several things: confusion, then amusement, then something that briefly looked like the beginning of real recognition before it settled back into amusement. "Mom, come on, I'm serious, Ryan, you're upset." "I get it. What I said last night was," he paused, searching for the word. "It came out wrong. I didn't mean did it come out wrong." He stopped. "Because I've been playing it back," I said, and it seemed pretty clear. "You said I barely do anything. You said I was living off your father's money. You said I was a leech." I looked at him in my own home, at my table, after I cooked you dinner. "You have 30 days. Ryan," he set the paper on the counter with deliberate, exaggerated calm, the gesture of a man who has decided that the best response to an unreasonable woman is patient condescension. "Let's just take a breath, okay? You're not actually going to do this. This isn't you." "This is exactly me," I said. "This is the part of me I should have introduced you to a long time ago." He took the paper back upstairs. That afternoon I called Diane Foster. Diane Foster had a small office on Marymount Avenue with bookshelves that covered every wall and a desk so buried in files I had no idea how she found anything. She was around 50, efficient, and had a way of listening that made you feel she had heard every variation of your particular disaster and was not impressed by any of them, which was oddly comforting. I laid it out for her plainly. My son and his wife had been living in my home for 10 months under an informal arrangement. No lease, no written agreement, no rent. I had asked them to contribute. They had refused, and I wanted them gone. She asked me a few precise questions, looked at the documents I'd brought, and nodded. "They're guests," she said, "not tenants. There's no lease, no regular rent exchange, no legal tenancy established. That's actually in your favor. Under North Carolina law, you're not required to go through a formal eviction process, but I'd recommend a written notice anyway. 30 days is generous, more than the law requires, and it protects you. If they try to claim later that you forced them out illegally, you have documentation showing you gave them reasonable time." She drafted the letter that afternoon. I drove home with it in my passenger seat, folded inside a manila envelope. I felt something strange, not relief exactly, not satisfaction. Something quieter and older than both of those. I felt like I was finally driving in the right direction. That week I stopped performing. That's the only word I can find for what I had been doing, performing a version of motherhood that required infinite sacrifice, zero acknowledgement, and the permanent suppression of my own comfort, budget, and dignity. I cooked only for myself. I removed their numbers from my grocery delivery account, the account I had been using to order food I predominantly bought for them, because Vanessa had strong preferences, and I had learned to navigate around those preferences the way you navigate around furniture in the dark. I called the insurance company and removed Ryan's truck from my automatic payment. I pulled my personal food onto a separate shelf in the pantry and put a piece of tape on it, not to be petty. Just to be clear, I stopped washing their clothes. I called a storage company and arranged to move Ryan's woodworking equipment, the table saw, the router, the lumber he'd been storing in my garage for 6 months into a paid unit nearby. I put his name on the account and paid through the end of the 30 days. After that, it was his problem. Vanessa noticed first. She came downstairs one morning looking for coffee creamer she'd seen in the fridge the day before. I'd moved it to my shelf. That's my shelf now. I think you finished the creamer yesterday. You might want to pick some up. She stared at me. Then she turned around and went back upstairs without another word. Ryan came down an hour later. His truck insurance notification had hit his phone. My insurance lapsed. No, it's active. The payment just won't be coming from my account anymore. He opened his mouth. Your truck, Ryan, your insurance. He looked at me for a long moment and I recognized the look. It was the one he'd worn as a teenager when he realized I wasn't going to be moved, and arguing further would only cost him dignity. He left for work without speaking. The second week, Vanessa decided to test me in a more direct way. I came downstairs on a Saturday morning to find cars lining the street in front of my house. Through the front window, I could see 12, maybe 13 people in my living room, Vanessa's friends, all holding mimosas and wearing the relaxed, sprawled-out confidence of people who believed they were welcome. I walked back upstairs and stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I walked back down. Vanessa appeared from the kitchen. Her expression shifted rapidly from surprise to recovery to forced warmth. Oh, Mom, we were just having some friends over, brunch. Nothing big. I was going to tell you, but I thought it's fine, right? You can hang out upstairs. We're not going to be loud, Vanessa. She stopped. This is my home. I don't hang out upstairs in my own home. I turned toward the living room. I'm going to need everyone to finish their drinks and head out. I apologize for the inconvenience. There was a moment, the kind that presses on everyone in the room simultaneously before people began reaching for their bags. Vanessa followed me into the kitchen, her voice dropping to a tight hiss. Are you serious right now? These are my friends. They're welcome in your home. This is my home. You're doing this to humiliate me. I'm asking unannounced guests to leave my property. That's not humiliation. That's a boundary. She stared at me with genuine fury, the fury of someone who has realized a door they assumed was always open has been quietly locked, and then she went to the living room to salvage what she could of her gathering. I made myself a pot of coffee and sat down at my kitchen table. My hands were steady. Ryan cycled through his approaches the way water cycles through different forms: anger, guilt, manipulation, each one carrying the same essential content, just in a different shape. Anger first. You're destroying this family. You know that, right? Dad would be sick if he could see you doing this. I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. I think your father, I said carefully, would be proud that I'm finally standing up for myself. He'd be ashamed. He always, Ryan. My voice was quiet, but it stopped him. Don't do that. Don't use your father as a weapon against me. He's not here to agree or disagree with you, and I knew Gerald a lot longer than you did. The guilt came next, always at night, always when I was tired. He sat at the kitchen table after dinner one evening, with his elbows on the surface, and his face arranged into something that was meant to look like genuine anguish, but had the practiced quality of an expression he'd tested before. I'm your only child, Mom. I'm all you have left. I hope that's not true, I said. Because if I need to be rescued from my decision by the threat of your absence, then one of us has made a terrible error in how we've understood love. The manipulation came last, and it came not from Ryan, but from Vanessa. She wanted access to my locked study. She framed it first as practical. She needed to use the printer. Couldn't I just leave it unlocked? I said she could knock and I would print whatever she needed. She tried again the next day. Same ask, different angle. Her laptop was broken and she needed a quiet place to work. I recognized the architecture of what she was building, and I declined, but Ryan didn't decline. On a Tuesday afternoon, while I was in the garden, he took the spare key from the hook in the kitchen, the key I had stupidly left accessible, and let himself into my study. I came in from the garden and found the study door ajar. Ryan was standing at my desk. He was holding the folder, the one that contained my property deed, my retirement account statements, and my estate planning documents. He turned when he heard me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I was just looking for a stapler, he said. We looked at each other. There was no stapler in that folder. Put it down, I said, and give me the key. He set the folder on the desk and held out the key, and then, almost involuntarily, his expression changed. Whatever mask he'd been managing dissolved for just a moment, and what I saw underneath wasn't anger or manipulation. It was calculation. He had seen the numbers that evening. Vanessa's entire demeanor shifted. She came to the kitchen while I was washing dishes and offered to help, actually reached past me for the dish towel, something she hadn't done in 10 months. You don't have to do all of this yourself, she said warmly. We should be pulling more weight around here. I handed her a wet plate. Thank you, Vanessa. Over the next 3 days, she brought me tea twice unsolicited. She complimented my sweater, my haircut, the rose bushes I'd pruned. She said the house felt so much more peaceful than their last place. She wondered aloud whether I had ever thought about the unfairness of doing all this work alone. On the fourth day, she sat across from me at the kitchen table with the careful posture of someone about to say something important. "I've been thinking," she said, "that what makes the most sense for everyone, financially, long-term, is if Ryan's name were on the house. Like an early inheritance situation. That way the estate would be simplified. You wouldn't have to worry about probate. I've been reading about it. And it's really complicated when the surviving parent hasn't done any planning." She paused to gauge my expression. "I kept it even, and then you could take the basement," she continued. "Have your own space down there, really make it your own little place. While Ryan and I use the main house, it would be so much better. For everyone." I looked at her for a long moment. "The basement," I said, "it's actually really nice down there. You could do—" "Vanessa," my voice came out quieter than I expected. "When you married Ryan, did you ever intend to treat me like a person? Or was I always just an asset in his column?" Her expression fractured and then, very quickly, reassembled. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." She left the kitchen. I sat down at my table, Gerald's table. My table, the table that would remain my table until I chose otherwise, and I understood something for the first time with complete clarity. They did not see me as a burden. They had never seen me as a burden. They saw me as a source. The question they had been quietly maneuvering around for 10 months was not how do we stop taking from her, it was how do we take more. I went upstairs and called Diane. "We may need to move this along," I said. "How much time is left on the notice?" 12 days. "I'll draft a follow-up letter. If they don't vacate, we begin formal proceedings the morning of day 31. "Thank you." "Diane." Evelyn, a pause. "Are you all right?" I thought about it honestly. "I will be," I said. "I'm getting there." The morning after I taped the notice to his door, Ryan came downstairs acting like nothing had happened. That was his first move: erasure. Pretend the thing occurred didn't occur. Pretend I hadn't said what I said. Pretend the envelope wasn't real. The deadline wasn't real, and if he just moved through the kitchen with enough casual confidence, reality would rearrange itself around his comfort. He poured himself coffee. He checked his phone. He opened the refrigerator, stared into it for a long moment, and pulled out the orange juice I had bought, along with everything else in that refrigerator, and drank directly from the carton. I watched him from the table. He finally looked at me. "Sleep okay?" "Fine," I said. "You?" "Yeah." He put the carton back. "Look, about last night, I was frustrated. Things have been stressful with work, and I took it out on you, and that wasn't fair." I wrapped both hands around my mug. "That's not an apology, Ryan. That's an explanation for why you feel entitled to speak to me that way." He blinked. "I just said it wasn't fair. You said it wasn't fair to take your stress out on me. You didn't say what you called me was wrong. You didn't say you didn't mean it." The silence stretched. "I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it?" Another silence. "Longer this time, Mom. Come on, you're not seriously going to make me move out over one bad night." "I'm not making you do anything," I said. "I'm telling you that you have 30 days to make your own arrangements. What you do with that information is up to you." He sets his mug down on the counter hard, but not quite hard enough to be a scene, and walked out of the kitchen. A minute later, I heard his truck start in the driveway and pull away. Vanessa didn't come downstairs until almost 11. She walked in wearing workout clothes she almost certainly hadn't exercised in, poured herself coffee, and stood at the counter scrolling her phone. Then, without looking up, she said, "Ryan told me you gave him some kind of notice. I gave both of you a notice. It applies to the household." She looked up then. Evelyn, her voice had that particular quality, patient, measured, slightly condescending, that I had learned to recognize as her version of diplomacy. "Don't you think this is a little extreme? We're family. Family doesn't call family a leech in their own home." He was venting. "He didn't mean it. That seems to be the consensus this morning. And yet no one has explained to me what he did mean." She put her phone face down on the counter. "What do you want us to say, that we're sorry?" "Fine. We're sorry. It was a bad night. Ryan was out of line. But you can't throw us out because of one argument. That's not how families work." "I think," I said carefully, "that you and I have very different definitions of how families work. In mine, everyone contributes, everyone shows basic respect, and when someone owns a home, that person decides who lives in it." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and walked out. I sat there until the coffee went cold. Then I picked up the phone and called my oldest friend, Patricia, who had known me since we were both 23 years old and had watched me survive things that should have broken me. "Well," Patricia said when I finished telling her, "it's about time. You're not surprised, Evelyn. I've been watching this happen for 10 months. I didn't say anything because you didn't ask, and you're a grown woman, but no, I'm not surprised. I'm relieved." He called me a leech. Pat, a pause. "I know, honey, and I'm so sorry, because you are the least leech-like person I have ever met in 60 years of living. You give and give until there's nothing left, and then you apologize for not giving more." Another pause. "That's done now, right? You're done?" I looked out the window at the rose bushes I had planted the spring after Gerald died, a project that had kept me outdoors and sane through the worst months of grief. "I'm done," I said. "Good. What do you need from me?" "Nothing right now." "I just needed to hear your voice." "I'm here," she said. "I'm always here, unlike some people who shall remain nameless." That made me laugh. It was the first time I had laughed in what felt like weeks. The first week passed with a cold, tense energy in the house, the kind that lives in the walls and the hallways and makes every shared space feel pressurized. Ryan and I moved around each other with extreme, deliberate politeness. Vanessa had perfected a particular expression, half wounded, half superior, that she deployed whenever we were in the same room. I declined to react to it. I had stopped cooking for them on day one. I had removed their numbers from the grocery account. I had separated my food onto my shelf. I had made the call about Ryan's truck insurance, and I had contacted the storage company about his equipment. Each of those actions felt in the moment like pressing on a bruise, not because I doubted myself I didn't, but because every one of them was evidence of how far things had gone. I was removing supports from adults who should never have needed me to hold them up in the first place. The fact that removing those supports felt radical was its own kind of answer about how badly this arrangement had warped. On Wednesday of that first week, Vanessa knocked on my bedroom door in the evening. I opened it. She was holding a plate of pasta takeout from the containers visible in the kitchen trash earlier. She'd put it on one of my nice plates, which I noticed. "I made extra," she said. "Thought you might want some." I looked at the plate. I looked at her face. She had that careful, constructed warmth that she wore when she wanted something. And I had learned too late, but I had learned to read the architecture underneath it. "That's thoughtful, Vanessa, but I've already eaten." "You can keep it." A flicker. "I just thought we got off to a rough start this week, and I wanted to—" "You don't need to bring me food. You need to start looking for an apartment." The warmth collapsed. She took the plate back downstairs. I closed my door and sat on the edge of my bed and breathed through the tightness in my chest. Not guilt. I recognized guilt, and this wasn't it. This was something older and sadder. Grief, maybe, for the version of this family I had imagined when I said yes to that phone call 2 years ago. But grief and regret are not the same thing. I was grieving something that had never actually existed. What had existed was this Ryan and Vanessa occupying my home and my generosity, with the comfort of people who had decided those things were simply available to them. I was not going to mourn the ending of that. The second week was when Ryan changed tactics. He started coming home earlier. He started sitting in the kitchen in the evenings when I was there, not doing anything specific, just being present the way he had when he was a teenager and wanted something but hadn't worked up to asking yet. On Tuesday night, he sat across from me while I was reading and didn't speak for 10 full minutes. "Mom," I looked up. "I want to talk about what's actually going on here, all right? Not the notice. Not the logistics. I mean, what's really going on between us?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and his face had shed the practiced certainty he usually wore. He looked tired. He looked young, which is a strange thing to say about a 36-year-old man. But he did. "Did I take advantage of you, coming here?" I put the book down. "Yes," I said. "You did." He absorbed that. I watched him take it in without flinching, which was something. "I didn't see it that way while it was happening," he said. I thought you needed us here too, after Dad. I thought it was mutual." "I did need you here at first," I said honestly. "The first month I was glad you were here. The house was too quiet and I wasn't ready for that quiet. But by month 3 I had figured out how to be alone, and by month 5 I was ready to start my own life again. And by month 8 I was running a household for 3 adults on a fixed income and being spoken to like an inconvenience." He was quiet out time. "What do you want from me? To say I'm sorry?" "I want you to be sorry. There's a difference, and I want you to use the next 18 days to find somewhere to live." He stood up, pushed back from the table. For a moment I thought he was going to walk away, and then he sat back down. "I don't know if we can afford an apartment right now. Vanessa and I haven't saved what I thought we had. Then you'll need to figure that out, Mom." "Ryan," my voice was even, but firm, "I am not a solution to your financial problems. I never was. I allowed myself to become one, and that was a mistake I made out of love, and I'm correcting it. But the correction ends here. I will not be the answer to this next problem." He got up and went to bed without saying anything else. I sat at that table for another half hour in the quiet of my own house, and I let myself feel the full weight of what I was doing, not to talk myself out of it, but to honor it. Setting a boundary like this isn't painless. Anyone who tells you it is has never loved someone difficult. The pain was real. The boundary was also real. Both things were true at once. Thursday of the second week, I came back from the grocery store, my groceries, my trip, my list to find 2 cars in my driveway I didn't recognize. I could hear voices coming from inside the house, specifically from the living room. I unlocked the front door and walked in. There were 7 people in my living room. Vanessa was in the center of the couch with her legs curled underneath her, holding court. Someone I had never seen in my life was sitting in Gerald's chair, the worn leather wingback that had been his reading chair for 20 years, and that I had kept in that corner specifically because it still held the shape of him. Everyone looked up when I came in, Vanessa said with visible irritation. We're in the middle of something. In my living room, I said. Not a question. It's not we're just having people over, I can see that. Unannounced, without asking, I looked at the person in Gerald's chair. I'm going to need you to find another seat. The room went very still. The person, a young man, couldn't have been 30, looked at Vanessa. Vanessa gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, as though she could communicate to him without me seeing it in my own living room. Now please, I said, pleasantly. Firmly he moved. I set my groceries down and addressed the room. I apologize for the interruption, but this home isn't available for gatherings without my knowledge or consent. I'd ask everyone to wrap up and head out. Vanessa can give you contact information to arrange things through her directly in the future. Vanessa stood up. You are doing this on purpose. I'm asking uninvited guests to leave my home. That's not a purpose, that's a right. This is humiliating, Vanessa. I lowered my voice so only she could hear. You invited 12 people to my house the week after I gave you a 30-day notice. In what version of events did you think that would go differently? She had no answer for that. People gathered their things with the shuffling, collective awkwardness of strangers caught in someone else's crisis. A few of them thanked me quietly on their way out, which surprised me, though in retrospect it shouldn't have. Most people, when confronted with someone calmly asserting a reasonable boundary, recognize the reasonableness even when it inconveniences them. When the last person left, Vanessa turned to me with tears, real or performed. I had genuinely stopped being able to tell the difference standing in her eyes. You have no idea what you're doing to us. I have a very clear idea, I said. I'm asking you to provide for yourselves. That is the entirety of what I am asking. She went upstairs. I put my groceries away. Then I went to my pottery books, a stack I'd been collecting for 3 years with a studio in mind that had never materialized, pulled one off the shelf, sat down in Gerald's chair and read for 2 hours. The house felt like mine again, not entirely, not yet. But closer. It was the Friday of the second week that I noticed the study. I had been more careful since Ryan took the key. I had moved the spare, changed the small habits that had made my private space accessible. But that Friday I came upstairs to find the study door, not quite latched the way a door looks when someone has pulled it shut from inside while trying not to be heard. I stood in the hallway, then I pushed it open. No one was there, but things were not quite where I had left them. The folder on my desk was turned at a different angle. The drawer on the left side, the one I kept correspondence in, was not fully closed. I stood very still. Then I walked to the desk, opened the drawer, and went through everything in it carefully. Nothing was missing. But things had been moved, read, replaced with the careful imprecision of someone going quickly. I looked at my desk for a long moment, then I went downstairs, found the small combination lockbox I had bought years ago for important documents, brought it upstairs and placed every financial document, every account statement, every legal paper into it. I set the combination to a date. Ryan would never guess our wedding anniversary, Gerald's and mine, and put the box in my closet. Then I changed the study lock entirely. I ordered a new keyed deadbolt online, watched 3 videos on how to install it, and had it on the door by that evening. I tested it 4 times. When Ryan came home that night, he tried the study door out of habit. I saw him do it from the kitchen, and I watched him process the new lock. He came to the kitchen doorway. You changed the lock. I did, because you don't trust me, because my private space is private, I said. That's what the word means. He stood there for a moment. I wasn't snooping. The other day I told you I was looking for a stapler, I said. I know. He left. I made myself dinner. I want to tell you about the call that came on day 17, because it almost unmade me. It was Ryan's aunt, Gerald's sister, Margaret. Margaret was 71, sharp, opinionated, and had never in 40 years refrained from sharing a perspective nobody asked for. She called at 7:30 in the evening when I was sitting on the back porch with a glass of wine, and I answered because I always answered Margaret. Evelyn, I heard what's going on. I imagine you did. Ryan called me. He's very upset. I'm sure he is, Evelyn. He's my brother's son. And what you're doing, throwing him out of his home, Margaret. I set down the wine glass. It's not his home. It was never his home. It's mine. Well, technically, yes, but not technically. Actually, I bought it. I paid it off. Gerald's name was never on the deed. This is my home, and my son has been living in it for 10 months without contributing a single dollar while calling me a burden. A pause. He didn't say it quite like that. He called me a leech. At my dinner table, after eating food I bought, a longer pause. That was wrong of him, Margaret said. Her voice had shifted slightly. That was wrong, thank you. But Evelyn is throwing him out, really the answer. He has nowhere to go. Vanessa's family is an option she has not yet explored because she's been waiting for me to change my mind. And Ryan has a job, they have income, they can find an apartment. It will be tight and they'll have to be careful, and that is called adulthood. Margaret's silence on the line. "You sound different," she said finally. "I feel different. You sound like you've made a decision. I made it 11 days ago. I'm just carrying it out." Another pause, then very quietly, "Gerald would have been proud of you for this, you know. He always said you were the strongest person he knew." My throat tightened. I hadn't expected that. He said that all the time. Said you carried the family without anyone ever seeing how heavy it was. A pause. "I see it, Evelyn. I'm sorry it took me this long to say so." I thanked her and got off the phone. Then I sat on that porch until it was fully dark, with the empty wine glass beside me and Gerald's words secondhand, delayed by years and death, and telephone settling into me like something I had been waiting a long time to hear. Strong, he had called me strong. I had been so busy being soft for everyone else that I had almost forgotten. The beginning of the third week brought a shift I hadn't anticipated. Ryan stopped fighting, not in the way I had hoped, not by packing, not by calling apartments, not by sitting down with a budget and a moving date and the serious face of a man confronting his own responsibilities. He stopped fighting by going quiet, by becoming absent in the house even when he was physically present. He would come home from work, go to the bedroom, come down for water, go back up. He ate takeout alone. He stopped seeking me out for conversations, arguments, negotiations. Vanessa filled the silence he left. She became, over those first 3 days of the third week, a different version of herself, softer, more present, almost anxious to please. She did the dishes one morning without being asked. She wiped down the stove. She asked me with visible effort if there was anything she could help with around the house. I watched her do these things the way you watch weather you don't quite trust. "Vanessa, what do you want?" She sat down across from me, and for a moment, something real crossed her face, something underneath the performance. "I want you to reconsider. I know. We don't have enough saved for a deposit and first and last month's rent all at once. We're going to have to borrow from my parents, and they're—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "They're not going to be happy about it." I softened slightly, despite myself. "Not about the decision, never about the decision. But about her. That's a hard conversation to have with your parents," I said. "I know, then why are you making us have it?" "Because it's yours to have. Not mine." I paused. "Vanessa, do you understand why I'm doing this?" "Not the surface of it, the real reason." She looked at me. Said nothing. "Because the longer you live this way, the harder it becomes to live any other way, and I don't want that for Ryan. And I don't want it for you," even though I stopped. Chose the next words carefully. "Even though this hasn't been an easy 10 months, she looked away. "You could have just asked us to pay more rent," she said quietly. "When it started being too much, you could have said something sooner." "You're right," I said. "I could have. That's a mistake I own. I let it go too long because I didn't want the conflict. And the cost of avoiding that conflict was exactly this." I met her eyes. "That's why I'm not avoiding it now." She sat with that for a moment. Then she stood up, smoothed her clothes, and went back upstairs without another word. But she didn't fight me for the rest of that day. It was the Wednesday of the third weekday, 18 of 30, when everything changed. I came home from the literacy center where I volunteered on Wednesday mornings, hung my keys on the hook, and found a business card on my kitchen counter that I had not put there. It had the name of a local real estate agent embossed on the front. On the back, in Vanessa's handwriting, was a number with 4 commas. I picked up the card. I stood there for a long moment. Then I heard voices upstairs. I walked to the foot of the stairs and listened. Vanessa's voice, clear and businesslike, carrying through the ceiling. Words I could make out: square footage, updated kitchen, comparable sales. I walked upstairs to the hallway and listened outside the guest room door, which was open a crack. A man's voice, professional, measured. Vanessa's voice, warm and proprietary in a way that sent a cold current up my spine. "The downstairs guest suite is particularly nice. The windows face south, so there's great light all morning." I pushed the door open. There was a man standing in the middle of my guest room with a phone in his hand, holding it up at different angles. A real estate agent, mid-40s, khakis, the lanyard of someone who does open houses on weekends. He looked up when I came in and his expression went immediately uncertain. Vanessa stood by the window. She turned. "Oh, Evelyn, you're back early. Who is this person?" "This is we were just—" The man stepped forward. "Mrs. Harper? I'm sorry, I was under the impression this is my home," I said. "I don't know who told you otherwise or what they told you, but this house is not for sale. It is not on the market, and I did not authorize anyone to photograph it." He had the decency to look genuinely embarrassed. "I'm very sorry," he said. "I'll excuse me." He gathered himself up and walked out. A moment later I heard the front door close. I turned to Vanessa. She was standing very still. "Explain," I said. "We were just getting a sense of—" "Do not—" My voice was quiet, but something in it made her stop. "Do not finish that sentence with anything that isn't the truth. You brought a real estate agent into my home to photograph it." "My home while I was out." "Why?" She looked at the window. "Because Ryan thinks we think if you understood the actual value, you'd see that it makes more sense." "To what?" "Vanessa, to let us take over the mortgage or the deed, Or she exhaled, to think about it differently, about what happens to this house. About the future, about your future, I said. In my house, she didn't answer. Where's Ryan? At work. Call him, I said. Tell him to come home. We're going to have a conversation. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and made the call. I went downstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. Ryan came through the front door 40 minutes later. He still had his work jacket on. He saw my face and stopped in the doorway. I placed the real estate card on the table between us. He looked at it. She told you, he said. Tell me your version. He sat down. He was quiet for a moment, the quiet of someone organizing a defense, and then something shifted. The defense dissolved. He put his elbows on the table and rubbed his face with both hands. We owe her parents money, he said finally, Vanessa's parents. We borrowed $12,000 after the restaurant failed, and we've been making payments. But we're behind, and they've been pressuring Vanessa about it. And she started looking at options about the house. I didn't tell her to do it. I didn't stop her either. Why not? He didn't answer right away. Because part of me wanted to know the number, he said. What it was worth, what we might, what could. He stopped. That sounds bad. It sounds honest, I said, which is more than I've gotten from either of you in a while. He looked up. You know what I keep thinking about? His voice was different, quieter, stripped of the performance. I keep thinking about how when Dad died, you called me and you sounded so small on the phone. You never sound small, and I thought, I have to go take care of her. I have to be there, he paused, but then we got here and it turned out you didn't need taking care of. You were fine, and the restaurant was failing and Vanessa was miserable and it was just easier. To let you handle things, the kitchen was very quiet. Ryan, I said, I needed you when I called you, that was real. But needing my son to come be with me and needing my son to move in and stop functioning as an adult are two completely different things. You mixed them up, so did I. 12 days, I said. You have 12 days, I know, you're not getting the house. That answer is final and it is not up for revisiting, I know, Mom. And when you leave, whatever relationship we have after this depends entirely on what you decide to do with the next 12 days and the months that come after them. Whether you respect this, whether you treat it as the reality it is. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he stood up, picked up the real estate card from the table, and put it in his pocket. I didn't know what he intended to do with it, and I didn't ask. Some things you have to let go of once you've said the true thing. He went upstairs. I got up, walked to the back door, and stood there looking out at the yard. The rose bushes needed deadheading. I had been meaning to do it for 2 weeks. I made a mental note to get out there this weekend, not because someone was watching, not because company was coming, not because the yard reflected on my hospitality or my worth as a person, but because the roses were mine and they were beautiful, and I had planted them with my own hands in the worst season of my life. That was reason enough. I went back to the kitchen, made tea outside for the first time in days. The evening felt like mine. 12 days sounds like a long time until you realize nothing is changing. Ryan and Vanessa were still in my house. Their clothes were still in my closet spaces. Their toiletries lined my bathroom shelves. Their shoes accumulated by the front door like they intended to keep arriving. Nobody was packing. Nobody was making calls about apartments, not that I could hear. Anyway, nobody was behaving like people who had 12 days to relocate their entire lives. They were waiting. I understood it because I had watched Ryan do the same thing since he was 8 years old, delay a consequence until the last possible moment, then rely on someone to soften it. He had failed a math test in 3rd grade and not told me until the night before parent-teacher conferences. He had crashed Gerald's car at 19 and left it in the garage for 6 days before admitting what happened. He was constitutionally oriented toward hoping problems would resolve themselves without confrontation. The problem this time was that I was the one who had to stop resolving them for him. So on the morning of day 19, I called Diane. They haven't started packing, I told her. Nobody's made any visible move toward leaving. Are you prepared to follow through on day 31? I thought about the real estate agent, about the folder on my desk with the page turned at the wrong angle, about Vanessa's voice carrying through my ceiling describing my south-facing windows like they were hers to describe. Yes, I said, then I'll prepare the documentation. If they haven't vacated by 7 a.m. on day 31, we begin formal proceedings that morning. A pause. It will be uncomfortable, Evelyn. It's already uncomfortable. More so. I'll need to send a second notice, an attorney's letter on firm letterhead. Delivered in person, that usually accelerates the timeline. Send it, I said. She delivered it that afternoon. I was in the kitchen when Ryan came in holding the envelope cream-colored, formal with Diane's firm name embossed in the upper left corner. He had opened it in the driveway. I could see by his face that the language in it was different from my handwritten notice. Diane wrote the way she practiced, precisely, without warmth, with the blunt clarity of someone who has spent decades saying exactly what the law means and nothing more. He stood in the kitchen doorway. You got a lawyer. I consulted an attorney 11 days ago, I said. She drafted my original notice. He looked at the letter again. Something was moving behind his eyes, the slow recalibration of someone who has just realized the thing they believed was negotiable is not. Mom, this says, if we're not out by the 30th, you'll file formal removal proceedings. Yes, you would actually, he stopped, you would take me to court. I would protect my property using every legal avenue available to me. Yes, he put the letter on the counter, he pressed both palms flat against the surface. And then he did something that broke my heart a little. Even as it resolved nothing, he looked up at me, with an expression so genuinely lost that for one terrible moment he looked exactly like the 8-year-old who had failed the math test and didn't know how to tell me. I don't know how to do this, he said. I don't know how to start over. Vanessa and I, we've been fighting every night. The money's a disaster. I don't even know where to begin. I looked at my son. And I said the truest thing I knew, Ryan. Nobody knows how to start over until they do it. That's what starting over means. I paused. But you have 11 days to figure out the first step. One step. Find an apartment you can afford, not the apartment you want, the one you can afford. That's it. That's the whole task. He stood there. And after that you figure out the next step. That's how it works. That's how it has always worked. I've been standing in front of the steps for a long time. I should have moved sooner. He picked up the letter, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. He went upstairs without speaking. 20 minutes later, I heard voices through the ceiling. Not words, just the compressed, urgent sound of two people having the conversation they had been avoiding for weeks. It rose and fell for almost an hour. At one point, something hit the floor, not thrown, just dropped, the percussive punctuation of frustration. Then it went quiet. I made dinner, set one place at the table. Ate slowly alone, listening to my own house breathe. It was the quietest meal I had eaten in 10 months. It also tasted better than anything I had cooked for the three of us combined. Day 20 arrived with a Thursday morning that felt different in the way that mornings do when something has shifted beneath the surface of a house. The particular quality of the silence, the sounds of drawers opening and closing upstairs with more frequency than usual, the muffled crinkle of boxes being unfolded. They were packing. Not enthusiastically, not gracefully, but packing. I did not comment on it. I did not go upstairs to observe. I did not say anything when I heard Ryan on the phone in the hallway that afternoon, his voice low and businesslike, asking about square footage and lease terms and move-in specials. I made my coffee, read my book, and let him handle his own life. Patricia called that afternoon and I told her. They're packing, she said, with the satisfied tone of someone who has been waiting for this specific update. Some of them slowly. But moving, yes, and how do you feel? I thought about it. Relieved and sad both at the same time. Is that strange, Evelyn? You raised that boy from nothing. You loved him for 36 years. Being sad that it came to this isn't strange. It would be strange if you weren't sad. I just keep thinking, where did it go wrong? Was there a moment, a specific thing I did that taught him it was acceptable to treat me this way? Probably not one moment, Patricia said. Probably 1,000 small ones. That's how it usually goes. You gave an inch. He took 2, and neither of you said anything. And then one day you looked up and there was no ground left. I hate that that's true, I know. But knowing it's true is how you make sure it doesn't happen again. We talked for another hour. Patricia had that gift, the gift of listening without trying to fix, of understanding that sometimes the most useful thing another person can do is be present without commentary. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in days. That evening, Vanessa came downstairs with a look I hadn't seen on her before. Not the performance of warmth, not the architecture of manipulation. Just tiredness, plain, unadorned exhaustion. She sat at the kitchen table. I didn't get up. I didn't offer her coffee. I waited. My parents are furious, she said finally. I didn't respond. They're lending us the deposit money, but my mom's spent 45 minutes on the phone telling me I should have done things differently. That we should have been more, that we took advantage. She paused. She used those words, took advantage. The kitchen was quiet. Your mother is right, I said gently, but without softening it. Vanessa looked at the table. I know. That was the first time she had said that without a qualifier. Without a but or a context or a pivot to my mistakes or Ryan's stress or the failed restaurant or any of the scaffolding she had constructed to support a different interpretation of events. Just I know. What happens after, she asked, between you and Ryan? Between you and us, what does that look like? I don't know yet, I said honestly. I know what I want it to look like. I want to have my son in my life. I want to have dinners together sometimes and phone calls, and I want to know his life and have him know mine. But I can't tell you what the relationship looks like until I see who he chooses to be after this. She nodded slowly. And me? Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. What about me and you? I looked at her. At this woman who had sat across from me at my table for 10 months, who had treated my home like an extended hotel stay, who had brought a real estate agent into my bedroom, and who was sitting here now with her hands in her lap and her armor finally set aside, looking like someone who wasn't sure if she had ever been anything other than a performance. I think you are capable of being a better version of yourself than what I've seen, I said. I genuinely believe that. And I think if you and Ryan get through this, really get through it, not just survive it, but actually do the work, you have a chance at something real. She didn't say anything. But she didn't leave right away either. She sat there for a few minutes more, in the kitchen, in the quiet, and I let her. Sometimes sitting in the truth together is enough. Day 23 hit me like a wall. I didn't expect it. I had been managing steady, purposeful, clear, and then I woke up on Thursday morning, and the weight of everything compressed itself onto my chest before I even got out of bed. 10 months of stress, a decade of accumulated self-erasure, 36 years of being Ryan's mother, of calibrating my needs against his, of learning to shrink in the spaces where he needed room. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and cried, not quietly, either, the ugly kind, the kind that comes from somewhere below your chest, below your stomach, from the deepest room in the house of yourself, where you have been storing things you were not ready to look at. I cried because Ryan had called me a leech at my own table. I cried because for a fraction of a second after he said it, some small damaged part of me had wondered if he was right. I cried because Gerald was gone and could not hold my hand through this. I cried because I had let it go on for 10 months when it should have ended at 3. I cried because I was 65 years old and setting a boundary in my own home felt like the bravest thing I had done in years, and that said something about how far I had fallen from myself. I cried until there was nothing left. Then I got up, washed my face, made coffee, and went out to the roses. I deadheaded every single bloom. I moved through the bushes methodically, cutting precisely, letting the dead things fall. By the time I was done, the yard smelled incredible, and my hands were scratched from the thorns, and I felt, inexplicably, steadier than I had all week. Grief is like that sometimes. You have to go through the middle of it to find the other side. On day 25, Margaret called again. I spoke to Ryan, she said without preamble. How did that go? He sounds terrible, which I told him was appropriate given the circumstances. A pause. He told me about the real estate agent, did he? He wasn't proud of it. Or he wasn't proud of knowing about it and not stopping it. I couldn't quite tell where the line was for him, but he knew it was wrong. Another pause. Evelyn, I want to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Do you want to reconcile with him? After this? Or are you doing what you need to do and prepared to lose him if that's what happens? I thought about it. Gave it the honest space it deserved. I want to reconcile, I said. But only if he becomes someone worth reconciling with. I'm not interested in returning to what we had, because what we had was me giving everything and him taking it, and neither of us calling it what it was. If what's on the other side of this is a real relationship where we treat each other like two adults who love each other and have equal dignity, yes, that's what I want. And if it's not, then I'll grieve that, and I'll live anyway. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Gerald really did marry the right woman, she said. I pressed my lips together against the tightness in my throat. Thank you, Margaret. Day 27 brought the moment I had been dreading since the notice went up. Ryan knocked on my bedroom door that evening. He never knocked on my bedroom door. In 10 months, he had opened every other door in this house without ceremony, including the one I had specifically locked, but he had never knocked on this one. The knock itself told me something had changed in him, even before he spoke. Can I come in? Yes, he sat in the chair by the window, the small reading chair I had brought up from the living room the previous year. He sat forward with his elbows on his knees, and he looked at me directly. We found a place, he said. It's not great. It's a 2-bedroom in West Asheville. 3rd floor, the carpet is ugly, and the kitchen is smaller than this closet. But it's ours. We signed Friday. We move Sunday, 3 days. Okay, I said. The movers cost more than I wanted to spend. I looked at renting a truck and doing it ourselves, but Vanessa's back has been. He stopped. Anyway, we're handling it. Good. He was quiet for a moment. Then I keep trying to figure out what to say to you. Like, is there a version of an apology that covers all of this? Because I've been writing it in my head for a week, and it keeps coming out either too small or too dramatic. Say the true thing, I said. Whatever that is. He looked at his hands. I used you, he said. I came here telling myself it was temporary, that we'd be back on our feet, that I was doing you a favor by keeping you company after Dad. But the truth is that you were convenient, you were available. And I let comfortable become permanent because he stopped. Because I could. Because you let me. And I hate that that's true, but it's true. The room was very still. The Leech thing, he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word. I want you to know I've thought about that every day since. I don't know why I said it. It's not true, and it was cruel, and I don't have a reason that makes it okay. I was angry and ashamed, and I aimed at you because you were there, and I said the worst possible thing to the best possible person. I looked at my son. He was still the 8-year-old who couldn't tell me about the math test. He was still the 19-year-old who left the car in the garage for 6 days. He was also a 36-year-old man who had just said the truest thing I had ever heard him say, without hedging, without pivoting, without asking for anything in return. People are never just one thing. That's the part that makes love so complicated. I accept your apology, I said. I want you to know that. I'm not withholding it or making you earn it. You said the true thing and I receive it. He exhaled a long, shaking breath. But Ryan, accepting an apology doesn't mean returning to what we were. What we were didn't work. What I want is something different. Something honest. Where I'm your mother and you're my son, and we're also two separate people with separate lives who choose to be in each other's world because we love each other, not because one of us needs rescuing. Is that possible? His voice was quiet. After all this, I think so, I said, if you're willing to do the work. If you stop waiting for someone else to carry you. If you treat Vanessa like a partner and not a third option after me, I paused. And if you understand that my door is always open to you, but the terms of walking through it have changed. He nodded. I understand, he said. I don't love it, but I understand it. Nobody loves growing up, I said. But most people are glad they did, he almost smiled. The edge of it, at least. He stood up. And then he did something he hadn't done since his father's funeral. He crossed the room and hugged me. Not the obligatory lean-in of family obligation, the real kind. The kind where both people are holding on. I hugged him back. We stood like that for a minute, my son and I, in my bedroom, in my house which I had fought for and earned and deserved to keep holding on to each other in the particular, irreducible way that only people who have hurt each other and survived it can. Then he stepped back, wiped his face with the back of his hand, cleared his throat. I'll have everything out by Sunday, he said. I'll be here, I said. He left. I heard his footsteps down the hallway, the soft close of the guest room door. I sat down on the edge of my bed and held myself very still. The decision had been right. The boundary had been right. The 30 days had been right. None of that made it simple. The last 3 days passed in a kind of suspended quiet. Boxes accumulated in the hallway, the spare bathroom gradually emptied. The closets in the guest room became visible in a way they hadn't been in 10 months. The house was making room for itself again. On Saturday evening one day before they left, Vanessa knocked on my study door, which no longer needed its new lock. I opened it. She held out a potted plant, a small succulent in a terracotta pot, unremarkable and clearly from the grocery store. But she was holding it with both hands and her face had that unguarded quality I had only seen twice before at the kitchen table when she said, I know. And now it's not much, she said. I wanted to give you something that would stay. I looked at the plant. I looked at her. I took it. Thank you, Vanessa. She nodded once, quickly, and turned and walked back down the hall. I set the plant on my windowsill. It was small. It was modest. It was alive. I decided to take care of it. Sunday morning arrived, gray and cool. The particular flat light of an October day that hasn't decided yet what kind of day it wants to be. I was up by 6, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. By 8, the movers arrived, 2 young men with a truck and the cheerful efficiency of people paid by the hour. They moved through the house with a speed that 10 months had not prepared me for. Boxes out. Furniture dismantled, rolled rugs, taped edges. The guest room emptied in 90 minutes. The bathroom in 20, the hallway cleared. Ryan managed the logistics. He was precise and quiet, directing the movers, carrying boxes himself when there were too many hands waiting. He did not look at me often, but when he did it was clean, no manipulation, no plea, no performance, just a look that said, I see you and I am doing the thing. Vanessa moved through the house with her head down. She was efficient in her own way. She did not dawdle in the rooms, did not run her hands along the walls, did not perform a farewell. She packed and carried and directed, and when she had filled the last box, she sat in the emptied guest room for 3 minutes alone. I did not disturb her. By 10:30 the truck was loaded. Ryan came to find me in the kitchen. He was holding his house key. He set it on the kitchen counter, the same kitchen counter where he had slammed his fork 11 days ago. In a different life. The key made a small clear sound against the surface. Thank you for the 30 days, he said. You needed them, I said. He looked at me one last time, and something in his face, the specific quality of it, told me that he was not the same person had sat across from me at this table and called me a leech. The changes were small and new the way anything new is. But they were there. I'll call you, he said. I'll answer, I said. He went out the front door. I heard the truck door close. I heard the engine turn over. I stood in my kitchen and listened to them leave. When the sound of the engine finally disappeared, the house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. I could hear the clock in the hallway. I could hear my own breathing. I walked through the room slowly, the living room, with Gerald's chair sitting exactly where it had always been. The hallway clear of shoes for the first time in 10 months. The guest room empty, smelling of the lavender spray the movers used. I stood in the doorway of that room for a long time. Then I went to the kitchen, poured a fresh cup of coffee, sat down at my table, and pulled out the notebook where I had been sketching pottery designs for 3 years. I opened to a clean page. I picked up my pencil. I started drawing. The first morning alone felt like learning to breathe in a different atmosphere. I woke up at 6:15 without an alarm, which had always been my habit before Ryan and Vanessa arrived and disrupted every quiet rhythm I had built since Gerald died. I lay in bed for a moment and listened, no voices through the ceiling. No shower running in the adjacent bathroom, no cabinet doors in the kitchen below. Just the clock in the hallway, the refrigerator hum, and somewhere outside, a bird that had opinions about the morning. I got up, made coffee, sat at my table. The house was mine again. Not partially mine. Not mine with asterisks and qualifications and the constant background awareness of other people's needs pressing against my own. Mine completely, every room, every shelf, every hour of the day. I sat there with my coffee and I did not know whether to laugh or cry. So I did both, a small, private mixed, the kind that happens when relief and grief share the same moment. I was relieved because the 30 days were over and I had carried them through. I was grieving because it had been necessary, because a mother and son should never have arrived at a 30-day notice in the first place. But grief and regret are not the same thing. I had learned that in the first year after Gerald, I was allowed to grieve the shape of what had happened without regretting the correction. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and went upstairs to the guest room. I stood in the doorway. The room was empty in the particular way of rooms that have been recently vacated, a few dust marks on the floor where furniture had sat, a faint impression in the carpet from the bed frame, a small hook on the wall where something had hung. The walls were the soft sage green I had chosen years ago, before Ryan and Vanessa had arrived and made the room theirs without asking. I walked in, ran my hand along one wall, then I went downstairs, made a list, got in my car, and drove to the art supply store. I had wanted a pottery studio since the year I retired. 3 years I had been collecting books, watching videos, making notes in that sketch notebook. 3 years of having the idea and not the space, because the space had been occupied first by Gerald's illness and grief and then by Ryan's indefinite residency. 3 years of a dream sitting on a shelf, not anymore. I bought clay, I bought tools, I bought a small electric kiln after researching it for 6 weeks with the same thoroughness I had applied to every major decision in my professional life. I bought an apron. I drove home with a back seat full of supplies and something in my chest that I recognized, dimly as joy, the specific and slightly unfamiliar feeling of moving towards something you want, rather than away from something you fear. Patricia came over that afternoon to help me rearrange the guest room. She walked in carrying a bottle of good wine and a casserole dish, and she stood in the middle of my living room and looked around at the cleared hallway and the empty shoe rack by the door and said, "Evelyn, your house looks like your house again." "It does," I said. She set the wine down and hugged me, not a polite hug. A real one, the kind that two women share when one of them has come through something the other one watched from close range and worried about. We moved furniture for 2 hours. We carried the small desk from the corner of the guest room out to the hallway. We repositioned the bookshelf. We put down the drop cloth I had bought and set up the work table that would hold the kiln. We reorganized the closet into storage for clay and tools and the dozen notebooks I had filled with designs. By the time we sat down with the wine, the room that had been Ryan and Vanessa's for 10 months looked like something else entirely. "Something mine. How do you feel?" Patricia asked. "I feel like I just moved into my own house," I said. She raised her glass. "Welcome home." We clinked glasses. Ryan called 6 days after he moved out. I was in the pottery studio. I was already calling it that in my head, even though the kiln hadn't arrived yet and all I had done so far was wedge clay at the work table and ruin 3 attempts at a basic cylinder. The phone buzzed on the shelf and I wiped my hands on my apron and looked at the screen. "Ryan," I let it ring once more before I answered, not to punish him, just to finish the thought I was in the middle of. "Hi, Ryan." "Hey, Mom." His voice was careful, the voice of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain without a map. "Is this an okay time?" "It's fine. I'm in the pottery studio." A pause. "You got the studio set up?" "Getting there. The kiln arrives Thursday." Another pause. Longer. I could hear him processing the image, his mother, in the room that had been his, making something. That's good." "Mom, that's really good. What did you need, Ryan?" He was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to tell you something, and I want to say it before I lose the nerve." So Vanessa and I started seeing a counselor, marriage counselor. We had our first session yesterday. I set down the clay tool I was holding. "That took courage," I said. "It was brutal, actually. A short, humorless sound that was almost a laugh. She had us each talk about the ways we'd been avoiding things, and there was a lot. More than I thought. More than Vanessa thought. The counselor, she asked me to describe my relationship with money, and I talked for 15 minutes, and then she just looked at me and said, "Tell me about your mother," and he stopped, and I cried. In a stranger's office on a Tuesday afternoon, a pause. "I don't know why I'm telling you that, because it's the truth," I said. "And you're practicing saying the truth." A long pause. "I'm going to make this right, Mom, not in a way that gets me anything from you. Just for real, I want to be the person you thought I was." "You don't need to be the person I thought you were," I said. "You need to be the person you actually are, but better. That's a more realistic goal." He made the almost law sound again. This time it was warmer. "Okay," he said, "better. I can try for that. That's all I'm asking." We talked for another 20 minutes, not about the 30 days or the notice or the real estate agent or any of it. We talked about the apartment, which he described as genuinely terrible with a specificity that suggested he was beginning to find it funny. He told me the carpet was the color of a mustard jar that someone had left in the sun. He told me the elevator was broken and they were on the 3rd floor and he had carried a couch up 2 flights of stairs and his lower back had opinions about that. I laughed, genuinely laughed. "Mom," he said when we were wrapping up, "I love you. I know I've been bad at showing that. But I do. I love you too, Ryan. I always have. That was never the question." "I know," he said. "I know." We hung up. I stood in my pottery studio with my phone in my clay-covered hand and let myself sit in that for a moment, not rushing past it, not qualifying it. My son had called me from his difficult apartment, from his new counselor's office, from the beginning of a different version of himself, and he had told me the truth. It was a start. It was enough. The call I'd not expect came on exactly 3 weeks after Ryan and Vanessa moved out. I was signing for the kiln delivery. The delivery man had the wide, cheerful energy of someone who liked his job when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I thanked the delivery man, closed the door, and called the number back. A woman answered, professional, efficient. She introduced herself as a program director at the Asheville Community Arts Center. Mrs. Harper, I got your name from Dorothy Reeves at the Literacy Center. She mentioned you'd been looking into studio pottery, and we're actually looking for someone to help co-teach our beginner clay workshop on Saturday mornings. The previous instructor moved to Portland in September. Dorothy said you spent 34 years in education and thought you might be interested. I stood in the hallway with the phone against my ear. Dorothy, my Tuesday morning volunteer partner at the Literacy Center, a small woman with white hair and an extensive opinion about everything, who had listened to me talk about my pottery studio plans for 3 weeks and apparently taken action without mentioning it. "I've only just started working with clay myself," I said. "I'm not sure I'm qualified to teach it. The class is introductory level. We have studio space, equipment, materials. What we need is someone who's good with people, patient, and genuinely enthusiastic." Dorothy said you had all 3 in abundance. I looked down the hallway toward the room where the kiln was now sitting in its box, uninstalled. "Can I call you back tomorrow?" I said. "Of course, take your time." I called Dorothy the moment I hung up. "You gave my name to the Arts Center." I did. No apology. No preamble. That was Dorothy. Without asking me, I knew you'd say no if I asked first. You'd overthink it and talk yourself out of it and then regret it for 6 months. This way you only have 1 day to overthink it. I laughed despite myself. "Dorothy, you've been wanting to do something with clay since before I met you. You're good with people. You have too much time now and too much structure in your DNA to just sit around, enjoying silence. You'll enjoy the silence more if you have something to teach on Saturdays." "Am I wrong?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "Call them back in the morning." "Say yes." I called them back the next morning. I said, "Tss." The first Saturday class was 3 weeks later, and I was more nervous walking into that studio space than I had been walking into my first day as a school principal 20 years ago. 8 students ranging from a 20-something graduate students to a man named Harold who was 73 and had decided to try something new after his retirement. The tables were arranged in a horseshoe. The clay was already out. The room smelled like earth and possibility. I stood at the front and looked at 8 people who were waiting for me to tell them something useful. "I should warn you," I said. "I've only been doing this for 3 weeks myself, so we're all figuring this out together. The only difference between me and you is that I've already ruined more cylinders than any of you have." Harold raised his hand. "How many?" 14, I said. He grinned. "I feel better about this already." The class was 2 hours. By the end of it, nobody had produced anything resembling professional work. Harold's attempt at a bowl looked like a landscape feature, and the graduate student, a young woman named Carmen, who had remarkable focus, had produced something that might generously be called a cup. I had spent the 2 hours moving from station to station, showing and encouraging and occasionally rescuing a collapsing wall, and when I walked out to my car afterward, I realized I had not thought about Ryan, or the 30 days, or anything that had happened in the last 2 months, for a single second of those 2 hours. That was the gift of purpose. It fills the room entirely, leaves no space for circling. I called Patricia on the way home. "It was good," I said. "It was really good." "Of course it was," she said. "You spent 34 years teaching children. Teaching adults how to make bowls is well within your capacity." Harold's bowl looked like a small mudslide. Did Harold enjoy himself? I thought of Harold's grin. "Very much. Then you did your job perfectly." Month 2. Settled into a rhythm I had almost forgotten was possible, the particular texture of a day that belongs to you. I woke when I chose, moved through my mornings at my own pace, spent time in the studio, went to the Literacy Center on Tuesdays and Thursdays, taught the Saturday class. I cooked for myself, really cooked, with the attention and pleasure that cooking carries when it is an obligation, and ate at my own table at my own time. I took the coastal trip. Gerald and I had planned it 4 times over the course of our marriage and canceled it 4 times, once for a home repair, Once for his mother's illness, once because Ryan was in a difficult stretch at school and needed us nearby, once simply because life had gotten in the way it does. It had existed for years as a promise we kept meaning to keep. I drove to the Outer Banks on a Wednesday in November, alone with a bag in the trunk and Gerald's old road atlas on the passenger seat, even though I was using my phone for navigation. I brought the atlas because he had marked it up over the years, small notations in his handwriting. Stars beside towns he wanted to visit, question marks beside routes he wasn't sure about. Driving with it felt in some irrational and necessary way like driving with him. I stayed 4 days. I walked the beaches in the mornings with the cold coming off the water in long, flat sheets. I ate seafood by myself at restaurants and did not feel self-conscious about it the way I had the first time I dined alone after Gerald died. I sat on the deck of the rental cottage in the evenings and watched the light leave the water and thought about what it means to be 65 and still in the beginning of something. On the last evening I called Ryan, not because anything had happened, just because I wanted to. He answered on the second ring. Mom, everything okay? Everything's fine. I'm at the Outer Banks. I took the trip, a long pause. You did? It's beautiful, Ryan. You and your father would have loved it. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear the slight change in his breathing, the swallow that precedes emotion in people who are trying to manage it. I'm glad you went, he said finally. I'm really glad. I am too. We talked for an hour, with the sound of the ocean somewhere behind my voice and the sound of his difficult apartment street noise somewhere behind his. He told me the counseling was hard and useful in equal measure. He told me he and Vanessa had been fighting less, which he attributed partly to the counselor and partly to the fact that external pressure of the particular kind I had been providing, removed from a relationship, forces the people in it to actually look at each other. He told me he'd sold the truck. The truck, I stopped. Ryan, you love that truck. I love the idea of the truck, he said. There's a difference. I was making payments I couldn't afford on a vehicle I chose because it looked a certain way. The counselor asked me what I actually needed for transportation, and the answer was something cheaper. So he paused. I bought a 2019 Civic Gray. It is very sensible, and I'm making peace with that. I laughed. Your father drove a sensible car for 20 years, I said. He was perfectly happy. I know, Ryan said. I know he was. We said goodnight. I sat on the deck for another hour after, watching the last of the light leave the sky, with Gerald's atlas on my lap and the sound of the water below, and I felt something I can only describe as complete. Not in a final way, not in the way of things that are over. In the way of a circle that has been made whole. The trip was finished. The thing that had been postponed was no longer postponed. The life I had been meaning to get back to was slowly and genuinely mine again. The twist came in December. I had not expected it. I had been moving through the weeks with a steadiness that felt earned, and I had been cautious about expecting too much from Ryan too quickly, and I had made my peace with the pace of things, and then December came and upended my expectations in a direction I had not anticipated. Vanessa called me, not Ryan. Vanessa. She called on a Tuesday evening, and I looked at her name on my screen for 2 full rings before I answered, because Vanessa had not called me directly since before the 30-day notice. Every communication had gone through Ryan carefully, like a letter passed through diplomatic channels. Evelyn. Her voice was different, steady in a new way, the particular steadiness of someone who has rehearsed what they want to say, but decided to abandon the rehearsal and just say it. I need to tell you something, and Ryan doesn't know I'm calling, and I want to say it before I lose the nerve. Go ahead. A breath. When we moved in with you, I told myself a story. The story was that we were in crisis and you had more than you needed, and it would be temporary and everyone would be fine. That story let me not look at what I was actually doing, which was treating your home like it was already mine. Your time like it was already mine. Your money like it was already mine. A pause. The real estate agent. Another pause. That was me. Ryan knew about it, but it was my idea. I want you to know that I know that. And I want you to know that I am. Her voice tightened slightly. I am deeply ashamed of it. The kitchen was very quiet. Vanessa, I said carefully, why are you telling me this now? Because the counselor asked us to do something this week. She asked us each to identify one thing we had done in the past year that we were genuinely ashamed of and to take direct responsibility for it with the person we had harmed. And I thought of a lot of things, but that one was the worst. The counselor sounds like a good one, I said. She's excellent. She's also very difficult. A short that might have been a laugh. Evelyn, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything from you. But I want you to know that I understand what I did. Not the surface version, the real version. You had built something, your home, your security, your life, and I was looking at it like a resource I deserved access to. That was wrong, deeply wrong. I sat down at the kitchen table. Thank you for saying that, I said. Do you know how rare that is? To say a true and uncomfortable thing without being asked and without softening it. The counselor said I was very good at softening things. She's right. You are. A pause, and you're not doing it now. That matters to me. A long pause. I don't know if we can be. She searched for the word. I don't know what the word is. Not friends, something. I don't know what we are to each other. We're connected, I said. Through Ryan. That doesn't require a specific category. It just requires honesty, which you're practicing right now. I want to do better, she said. For Ryan, for myself, and I wanted you to know that we talked for another 30 minutes. Not the maneuvering conversations of the previous year, just two women talking. Honestly, in the particular register that becomes possible when the performance is finally set down. She told me about the counseling. She told me about calling her own parents to apologize for how she had spoken about me to them. She told me her mother had cried. Why did your mother cry? I asked. Because she said she'd taught me better than that, Vanessa said quietly. And she was right. When we hung up, I sat at my table for a long time. I had not expected Vanessa. Of the two of them, she had been the one I was least sure about, the one whose layers ran deeper and whose armor had been better fitted. And she had called me on a Tuesday evening and dismantled the armor piece by piece without being asked. People surprise you, not always and not on schedule, and not in the ways you plan for, but sometimes they do. I picked up my phone and texted Patricia. Vanessa called. You're going to want to hear this one. 3 dots appeared immediately. Calling you in 5 minutes, she wrote back, in all caps, which was how Patricia communicated urgency. I was already smiling when the phone rang. Christmas came, and with it the question I'd been quietly holding for 2 months. Would Ryan and Vanessa come for dinner? I had not invited them. I had not ruled it out. I had been watching and waiting and measuring, not because I was withholding, but because I wanted the invitation, when it came, to mean something, to come from a real place rather than obligation or habit or the performance of holiday family togetherness. Ryan brought it up the week before. He called and navigated his way to it carefully. The way you approach something you're not sure of the temperature of. I wasn't going to assume anything, he said, about Christmas. We have options for where to go. Vanessa's parents, or just staying in the two of us, but I wanted to ask. If you wanted us there, I thought about it. Yes, I said. Come for dinner, Christmas Day, 2 o'clock. Yes, Ryan, I want my son at my table on Christmas. Then quietly we'll be there. They arrived at 1:55, which was itself a small change. The previous year, Ryan and Vanessa had been 30 minutes late to everything as a matter of course, and I had adjusted the meal timing without saying anything, which was one of 1,000 small accommodations I had made so silently that I'd forgotten I was making them. 1:55, Ryan was carrying a bottle of wine in a paper bag that turned out to contain a small, carefully wrapped box. Vanessa had a dish she had actually made, at home from a recipe she showed me on her phone with a kind of anxious pride. I've never made sweet potato casserole before, she said. It might be terrible. It won't be terrible, I said. But even if it is, you made it, which is the point. It was not terrible. It was slightly oversweetened, and the topping was a little uneven, and it was the best thing she had contributed to a meal in my kitchen in 11 months of combined occupancy. I told her so directly and watched her face do something complicated and real. We ate at the kitchen table, Gerald's table, my table, the table that had held 34 years of meals and arguments and celebrations and silences. We talked the way people talk when they are out of performance mode, the conversation bumping along naturally, finding its own rhythm, comfortable in the pauses. Ryan told a story about the elevator in his building finally being repaired by a maintenance man who had clearly never repaired an elevator before. Vanessa told me the counselor had given them an assignment for the new year that involved each of them writing a personal budget independently and then comparing them. We had very different ideas about what things cost, she said, with a dryness that suggested the comparison had been illuminating. That sounds like a useful exercise, I said. It was humbling, Ryan said. Deeply, specifically humbling. After dinner, Ryan asked if he could see the pottery studio. I took him upstairs and stood in the doorway while he walked in and looked around at the work table, the tools arranged on their shelf, the kiln in the corner, the sketches pinned to the board above the table, the small shelf where I kept the pieces I had made. He picked up a mug. It was the first successful one, slightly asymmetrical, with a handle that pulled a little to the left, but structurally sound and glazed in a blue-gray that I had mixed myself. You made this, he said, last Tuesday. He turned it in his hands. Mom, this is actually beautiful. It's imperfect, I said. Yeah, he set it down carefully. But it's real. You can tell someone actually made it. He looked at the studio around him. This room looks like you, it really does. I looked at the room. He was right. It looked like me, like the version of me that had been waiting patiently through the years of running a school and running a household and running support for everyone around me. The version that made things with her hands and taught on Saturday mornings and drove to the coast alone and kept a succulent on the windowsill given by an unlikely source. Thank you for letting us come today, Ryan said. He was still looking at the mug. Thank you for showing up as yourselves, I said. That's all I've ever wanted. He set the mug down and we went back downstairs, where Vanessa had made tea without being asked and set 3 cups on the kitchen table without ceremony. We sat there until 6, talking and quiet in roughly equal measure. The particular balance of a family that has been through something difficult and come out the other side still intact, not unchanged. Not pretending nothing happened, but intact. When they got up to leave, Ryan paused at the front door and turned around. He handed me the paper bag he had carried in. I had forgotten about it. Inside the box was something he had wrapped himself, the tape applied with the particular imprecision of a man who does not wrap gifts often. I pulled back the paper. It was a small wooden thing. A bird carved from a piece of pale wood no bigger than my fist. Simple, clean, the lines made by hand rather than machine. And on the underside, burned in careful letters, E.H. for Evelyn Harper, and below that, also burned, made by R. Ryan had made it. He still had his woodworking tools. The ones I had put in storage, he had been using them. I looked at the bird in my hand. Your father taught you how to carve, I said. Summer before 8th grade, Ryan said, in the garage. He was terrible at it and I was worse, but we kept at it. A pause. I found some of his old tools in the storage unit when I picked up my stuff. They were in the back in a box I didn't know was there. I don't know how they ended up in my equipment. He looked at me. I've been carving every night for the past month. I think I've been trying to feel close to him. I held the bird. I thought about Gerald in the garage on a summer afternoon. Patient and imprecise and committed to the doing of the thing regardless of the quality of the outcome. The man who had been terrible at carving and done it anyway because his son wanted to learn. Who had marked his son's height on a wall in pencil and never suggested painting over it. Who had called me the strongest person he knew without ever saying it to my face. Keep carving, I said. He would have loved that you're doing this. Ryan nodded. His jaw was tight in the particular way of men who are managing emotion at a threshold. Merry Christmas, Mom. Merry Christmas, Ryan. He and Vanessa went out the front door into the cold December evening. I watched their car until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the door, carried the small wooden bird upstairs, and put it on the shelf in my pottery studio between the blue-gray mug and the succulent Vanessa had given me in a terracotta pot, which was still alive and had put out 3 new leaves since October. I stood there looking at the shelf, a mug I had made with my own hands, a plant given in an unexpected moment of honesty, a bird carved by my son from a material his father had taught him. 3 small things, all of them real, all of them mine. I turned off the light and went to bed. I slept better that night than I had in 2 years. January arrived the way January always does after a hard year, quietly, without ceremony, with a kind of stripped-down honesty that only comes when the holidays are over and the decorations are down and life presents itself in its plainest form. I woke up on the 2nd day of the new year and lay in bed for a moment taking inventory of myself, not in the anxious way I had done for most of the previous year, cataloging worries, mapping problems, bracing for whatever the day would require of me, just a quiet, genuine check-in, the kind you do when you're finally living in a life that actually belongs to you. My body felt rested. My studio was across the hall. My kiln had fired its 4th successful batch. My Saturday class had 8 students who were getting measurably better every week, including Harold, whose bowls now looked like bowls rather than geological formations. My son was in a gray Civic, in an apartment with ugly carpet, doing the work. My house was mine. I got up, made coffee, started the day. What I did not know, lying there in the first week of January, was that the year was going to ask more of me. Not in the way the previous year had, not in the grinding, erosive way of 10 months of invisible labor and disrespect. In a different way, the way that growth asks things of you, which is its own kind of difficult. The first surprise came from Diane. I had called her in mid-January to settle the final paperwork, a few loose ends from the notice process, documents to file, records to close. We had coffee at a bakery near her office, and she asked how I was doing with the directness that was her defining characteristic. Better than I expected, I said honestly. Good. She set down her cup. I want to ask you something and tell me if it's out of line. I've been doing tenant and property law for 22 years. I see a lot of people in situations like yours, adult children, aging parents, informal living arrangements that turn into something much more complicated. Most of them don't handle it the way you did. Most of them probably don't get called a leech at their own dinner table, I said. A small smile. Some of them do, but most of them don't issue the notice. Most of them absorb it, or they try to handle it without any documentation and it becomes legally complicated later. Or they issue the notice and then walk it back. She looked at me. You didn't walk it back. No, I said I didn't. I have a client, Diane said carefully. Similar situation, 71 years old. Her daughter and son-in-law have been living with her for 8 months. She came to see me last week and she asked about her options and I told her, and then she said she needed to think about it. She came back 2 days later and she wanted to know, could she talk to someone who had been through it? Someone who had actually done it and come out the other side. I looked at Diane across the table. You want me to talk to her? Only if you're willing. Completely up to you, no obligation. I thought about it. About the woman, 71, 8 months in, standing at the beginning of the thing I had stood at the beginning of, about what I would have wanted at that moment, not advice exactly. Not a legal briefing, something more human than that. What's her name? I said. Carol, call her, I said. Give her my number. Carol called 3 days later. She talked for 40 minutes before I said very much at all, which told me she had been carrying this alone for a long time and needed to pour it out before she could hear anything back. I recognized the particular cadence of it, the apologizing in the middle of describing her own pain, the qualifying of her own legitimate grievances, the careful cushioning of any criticism of her daughter with reassurances about how much she loved her. When she finally paused, I said, Carol, you don't have to defend yourself to me. I'm not going to judge you for being frustrated. You're allowed to be frustrated. A long silence. Nobody said that to me, she said. Everyone tells me family is complicated and I should try to be patient. Family is complicated, I said, and patience is a virtue. But patience with yourself matters just as much as patience with the people who are taking advantage of you. Another long silence. Do you think I should do it? She asked. The notice. I think you should figure out what you actually want, I said. Not what you're supposed to want. Not the answer that keeps everyone comfortable. What you genuinely want your life to look like. A pause. And then I think you should have the courage to pursue that. Whatever it is, we talked twice more over the following month. The second time she told me she had given the notice. Her voice was shaking when she said it, but it was there the particular quality of a decision that's been made and held. The third time she called, she was crying, not from pain. From relief. She's packing, Carol said. My daughter is actually packing. How do you feel? Terrified, she said. And more like myself than I have in 8 months. That's exactly right, I said. That's exactly how it feels. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time thinking about what had just happened. I had not set out to be someone who guided other women through this particular territory. I had set out only to survive my own version of it. But here was Carol packing her daughter's boxes by proxy, held up in part by my willingness to say I know how this feels because I have felt it. There is something in being useful that exceeds the utility itself. Something that says your hardest moments were not wasted, that they were tuition for something you couldn't see yet, that the cost of going through a difficult thing is sometimes the capacity to accompany others through theirs. I thought about that for a long time, then I picked up the phone and called Diane back. Tell me, I said, what it would look like to do this more formally. February brought Ryan's second genuine surprise. He called on a Thursday evening, the good kind of call, the ones that had been slowly accumulating since December, where his voice carried a lightness that felt real rather than performed. The counselor gave us a new assignment, he said. What is it? She wants us to each write a list of 5 things we want from our marriage that we've never directly asked for. Like actually asked out loud. Not hinted at, not assumed the other person should know. Said directly. A pause. Vanessa's list includes things that surprised me. I think mine surprised her. What's on yours? I asked. A pause. Top of the list is that I want to feel like I'm enough. Not supplemented by someone else's money or safety net or resources. Just that what I bring is sufficient for us to live on. The kitchen was very quiet. Ryan, I said carefully, did you know you felt that way? Before you wrote it down? No, he said. I thought I was mad about the restaurant. I thought I was stressed about money. I didn't realize there was something underneath it that was about proving something. To myself, to Vanessa, to Dad, even though he's gone. A pause. The counselor says I've been outsourcing my sense of adequacy to external things. The truck, the restaurant. Your support. Instead of building it from the inside, I sat with that for a moment. You know what I think? I said. What? I think your father would recognize that feeling. He struggled with it too in different ways. He never told you that because he figured it out quietly, over years, and by the time you were old enough to have the conversation, he thought he was past it. But he wasn't always certain of himself. He just kept working at it until the certainty built up from the inside the way you're describing. Ryan was quiet. You never told me that, he said. You never asked who your father was, I said. You knew who he was to you. That's different. Another pause. Was he proud of me? His voice was quieter than usual. At the end, do you know if he was proud of me, Ryan? I felt the tightness in my throat. He talked about you constantly. To everyone. The restaurant, he told everyone about the restaurant. How brave he thought it was that you were trying something. He didn't know it was going to fail. None of us did. But he thought the trying was, he thought you were bold. He said that more than once. A long silence. I wish I'd known, Ryan said. I wish I'd told you sooner. We stayed on the phone for a while after that. Not saying very much. Just existing on the line together in the particular way of 2 people who have just shared something that needed to be said for a long time. When we hung up, I went upstairs to the pottery studio and stood at the work table and cried. Briefly and completely for Gerald, for the conversation he and Ryan never had. For all the things that get left unsaid because we assume there will be time, and then there isn't. Then I wedged a ball of clay and started working. The rhythm of it, the pressing and folding, the push and turn, did what it always did, which was to bring me back into my body, into the present, away from the past and its incompletable business. I made a vase that evening, tall, slightly irregular, with a lip that curved gently outward. I glazed it 2 weeks later in a warm amber that reminded me of late afternoon light. When it came out of the kiln, I put it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. Then I called Ryan and told him to come by that weekend. I had something for him. He came on a Saturday afternoon. Alone, Vanessa had a thing with her sister, he said, with the relaxed ease of a man whose wife had a life of her own that he supported. He sat at my kitchen table and I put the vase in front of him. He looked at it, turned it slowly. "You made this for you," I said. "For your apartment, the one with the ugly carpet." He held it carefully, the way he had held the mug in the studio at Christmas. He had that quality when he touched things. I made a careful attention, like he was reading something in the surface, Mom. His voice was thick. It's not perfect," I said. "The lip pulls slightly to the left." "I don't care about the lip. Put it somewhere you can see it," I said. "That's the only condition." He set it down gently. Looked at me. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "Can I tell you?" "Go ahead. When we were living here in those 10 months, I think part of me believed that you owed me something. Not consciously, I wouldn't have said it out loud. But underneath everything, there was this assumption. That because you were my mother, and you had resources and I was struggling, the natural order of things was that you would support me. That it was your role, your obligation." He paused. "The counselor calls it entitled thinking. I call it I don't know. I call it something I learned somewhere that I have to unlearn." "Where do you think you learned it?" I said. He thought about it. "Both places," he said. "From watching you give everything without being asked and never say enough. And from deciding at some point that your giving meant you would always give. That it was unlimited." He looked at the table. "I took the unlimited part for granted. I didn't think about what it cost you. The kitchen was very still." "That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me," I said. "The counselor makes me practice," he said. A small, rueful sound. "I'm getting better at it." "You are," I said. "You really are." He picked up the vase again, held it in both hands. "I'm going to put it on the windowsill," he said. "The one in the living room. It's the only window that gets real light." "Good," I said. "That's where it belongs." The twist I never saw coming arrived in March, on a rainy Tuesday, in the form of a letter, not an email. An actual letter in an envelope with a stamp addressed in handwriting I did not recognize. The return address was a city in South Carolina. I opened it at the kitchen table. It was from a woman named Miriam Cole. She was 68 years old, she wrote, and she had found the Asheville Community Arts Center workshop listing through an online search. She had seen my name listed as the Saturday instructor. She had looked me up, not in a disturbing way, she was careful to say, but she had found the Literacy Center's volunteer page, which had a brief bio, and she had recognized something. She had been through what she described, carefully and with restraint, as a similar situation. Her son, 2 years prior, a house she had almost lost control of before she found the courage to reclaim it. She had not spoken to her son since. She was writing to me because she wanted to know if it was possible to come back from something like that. She had heard through a mutual connection that she didn't fully explain that I had come through my version of it, and that my relationship with my son was healing. She wanted to know if that was true. She wanted to know if there was hope. She closed the letter with, "I am not asking you to tell me what to do. I am only asking if you have found that the other side of this is livable. Because right now I am not sure that it is." I read the letter twice. Then I set it down on the table and looked at it for a long time. Miriam Cole, 68, estranged from her son for 2 years. Writing to a stranger in Asheville on a rainy Tuesday in March because she needed to know if there was another side. I picked up a pen, took out a piece of stationery, the good kind, the kind I had bought years ago with some idea of writing proper letters and never quite gotten around to. I wrote back by hand. I told her, yes, the other side is livable. More than livable. I told her about the pottery studio, about the Saturday class, about Harold's bowls and Carmen's lopsided cup, and the way 2 hours of teaching could evacuate 10 months of pain. I told her about the coastal trip and Gerald's atlas on the passenger seat. I told her about Ryan's counseling and Vanessa's unexpected phone call and the wooden bird on my shelf and the amber vase on his windowsill. I told her that estrangement and distance are not the same thing. That sometimes a relationship needs to be put down before it can be picked up again in a form that doesn't hurt both people. That 2 years of silence might be precisely what both she and her son needed before either of them could speak in a language the other could actually hear. And I told her that I could not promise her that her son would change. I could not promise her that the other side included him, but I could promise her that the other side included her, that the life waiting for her on the other side of her own grief and her own boundary was a full one, a real one that belonged to her in a way that nothing had for a long time. I mailed it the next morning. She wrote back 2 weeks later. 2 pages. Her handwriting was large and slightly uneven, the writing of someone who doesn't write by hand often and is making an effort. She told me about her house, her garden, the watercolor class she had started attending on Thursday mornings with deep ambivalence and unexpected pleasure. She told me that her son had left a voicemail in January that she had listened to 4 times and not yet returned. She asked me what I thought she should do. I wrote back, "Call him, not because you owe him a call, because you want to. And if you don't want to yet, wait until you do. Your timeline is the only timeline that matters here." She called him in April. She wrote to tell me in a letter that arrived on a Friday. One paragraph, her handwriting was steadier this time. "It went okay," she wrote. "He cried, I cried, we didn't solve anything. But we talked. That's something. That's more than we had." I put the letter in the box I had started keeping, not a formal archive. Just a shoebox on the studio shelf where I put things I wanted to keep. Miriam's letters. Carol's last voicemail transcribed because I hadn't wanted to lose it. A card from Dorothy at the Literacy Center. A photograph of Harold holding up a bowl that was finally, undeniably a bowl, a life accumulated in small honest pieces. My 66th birthday arrived on a Saturday in April, which meant I had class in the morning. I had not asked my students to do anything special. I am not a person who requires ceremony, and so I walked into the studio at 9 a.m. expecting a normal class, and found that Harold had brought donuts. Carmen had made a card signed by everyone, and a student named Rosario who had joined in February had somehow found out my favorite flavor of coffee and had a cup waiting on my work table. I stood in the doorway and looked at these 8 people who had come into my life because Dorothy had given my name to a program director without asking permission, and I felt something I can only describe as abundance. Not the abundance of things or money or space, though I had all of those in adequate measure. The abundance of a life that is genuinely your own, filled with people you have chosen and work you have made, and mornings you wake up into with genuine curiosity about what they hold. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "We know," Harold said. "We wanted to. There's a difference." I heard my own words come back to me in his voice and laughed. "We made things for 2 hours. It was a good class." Harold's bowl was his best yet. Rosario finally centered her clay without assistance, which she had been working toward for 6 weeks, and which she celebrated by raising both hands over her head in a victory gesture that made everyone in the room cheer. Ryan and Vanessa came for dinner that evening. Ryan arrived first, slightly early, carrying the wooden sign. He had made it from a piece of pale ash wood, smooth and sealed, the letters burned in the same careful hand as the bird. He handed it to me at the door without preamble. I looked at it. Evelyn's second chapter. I turned it over in my hands. "Ryan, I know it's a little much," he said quickly. "You don't have to put it up if you don't." "I'm putting it up today," I said. "Right now, come help me find the right spot." We hung it above the door to the pottery studio. It took 3 attempts to get it level, which required Ryan to hold it while I stepped back and evaluated, twice telling him to go half an inch to the left and once telling him to go back to where he started, until we both agreed it was right. Vanessa arrived during the leveling process and stood in the hallway watching us with an expression that was entirely unguarded, warm and wry and genuine, the face of someone who is watching something good without feeling the need to insert herself into it. "Is it straight?" she asked. "Almost," Ryan said. "It's been almost for 10 minutes, I said. "Almost means we're being precise," Ryan said. "Dad always," he stopped. We all 3 were quiet for a moment in the hallway. The sign held steady, Gerald in the air between us the way he sometimes was, not heavy, not painful, just present. The way people we love remain present when we let them. "Dad always said measure twice," I finished, "and you've measured 4 times. Ryan laughed. Vanessa laughed. I laughed. We hung the sign. We went downstairs and cooked dinner together, actually together. The 3 of us in my kitchen, with Ryan handling the grill and Vanessa chopping vegetables and me managing the sauce, bumping elbows in the space without ceremony or awkwardness. The ordinary choreography of people who are becoming comfortable with each other in a new way. We ate at my table, Gerald's table, our table. Vanessa told a story about something that had happened at the counselor's office that was equal parts embarrassing and funny, and she told it on herself without self-protection, which was so different from the Vanessa of 10 months ago that I had to remind myself they were the same person. People change. It takes the right conditions and the right pressure and the willingness to look at an uncomfortable thing without looking away. But they change. After dinner, while Ryan was washing dishes, he had started doing that without being asked. Every time he came over, which was its own small and significant statement, Vanessa sat across from me at the table with her cup of tea. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. When you gave us the notice on day 1, when you taped it to the door at 6 in the morning and we hadn't gotten up yet, were you afraid?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said. My hands were shaking, "but you did it anyway." "I did it anyway," she nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that a lot," she said. "About what it means to do something you're afraid of because it's right. Because it's true," she paused. "I've been afraid of a lot of things for a long time. Afraid of not having enough, afraid of my parents' disappointment, afraid of what it would mean about me if we failed." She looked at her cup. I think I outsourced my fear onto you, tried to solve it by controlling your resources instead of managing my own. That's a very clear-eyed thing to say, I said. The counselor is very insistent on clear-eyed, she said. With a dry smile, Ryan finished the dishes. He came and sat beside Vanessa at the table, and she moved her tea to make room, and for a moment the three of us were just there at the table, in the light, in the particular and irreducible warmth of an evening that had earned its own peace. "Happy birthday, Mom," Ryan said. "Thank you," I said. "It's been a good one. What do you want for the year?" he asked. If you could name one thing, I thought about it. About the pottery studio and the Saturday classes and Miriam's letters in the shoebox and Carol finding herself on the other side. About the coastal trip and Gerald's atlas and the rose bushes that needed attention again now that spring had arrived. About the amber vase on Ryan's windowsill and the bird on my studio shelf and the sign above the door that said second chapter. "I want more of this," I said, "more of what's already here. More mornings that belong to me, more things made by my own hands. More honest conversations, more time with my son that doesn't cost either of us our dignity." I looked at him. "That's it, that's the whole list." Ryan nodded. His jaw did the tight thing it did when he was managing something real. "I can do that," he said. "I know you can," I said. "That's why I'm asking." They left at 9. I stood at the front door and watched them down the walk, Vanessa reaching for Ryan's hand as they reached the car, a small unrehearsed gesture that said more about where they were than any conversation could. I closed the door. I went upstairs and stood in the doorway of my pottery studio and looked at the sign above the door level. Finally, after 4 measurements and at the shelf below the window where the bird sat beside the succulent, beside the blue-gray mug I had made with my own hands in the first week of learning. I thought about the woman who had sat in a dark kitchen 10 months ago and decided, at 65, that she was not finished, that the ground she had lost was worth reclaiming, that the door to the life she had always meant to live was still open, even if she had to clear some things out of the way to walk through it. I thought about what it had cost the 30 days. The tightness in my chest every morning of them, the tears on the kitchen floor after the truck disappeared, the phone calls from Margaret, the letter from Miriam, the 3 hours of crying on day 23 that had left me hollowed out and, somehow lighter. None of it had been easy, all of it had been necessary. And on the other side of necessary was this, a pottery studio with a sign above the door, a son who washed dishes without being asked, a daughter-in-law learning to look at uncomfortable truths without looking away, 8 students who brought donuts on a birthday, a friend who called in all capitals, a letter in a shoebox from a woman in South Carolina who had found that yes, the other side was livable, the other side was more than livable. The other side was mine. I turned off the studio light, went to bed, slept in the easy, uncomplicated way of someone who has set down what didn't belong to her and picked up what did. In the morning I would open the kiln. There was a new batch inside a set of small bowls I had been working on for 2 weeks, each one slightly different, each one made from the same clay, turned in the same hands toward a different shape. I didn't know yet how they had come through the fire. That was the part of pottery that I had come to love most, the uncertainty. You do the work, you set the conditions, you close the door, and then you wait and trust, and when you open it again, you find out what survived. Some things don't make it through. Some things crack under the pressure or collapse in the heat or emerge in a form you didn't intend. But some things, the ones that were made right, shaped with care, given enough time, come out of the fire stronger than they went in. I had come out of this fire. I was not who I had been before it. I was more, and tomorrow morning when I opened the kiln door in the room that used to hold other people's lives and now held mine, I would find out what else had made it through. I already knew the answer. Everything that mattered,